Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to today's session on pursuing an internship in the public policy space, or more specifically, interning at the Civic Innovation Foundation, or Civis. This session is a part of the Plant LLB and Civis social impact driven collaboration, which is geared towards SDGs 4 and 16 through an experience based teaching and learning model. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Aditya Tanu, a graduate from MNLU who's currently working with Civis as a consultatio fellow, and also Shrishti Srivastava, an ex-intern at Civis who is currently a student at GLC Mumbai. In today's session, they will be speaking about the importance of interning in the public policy space and its utility for law students and professional lawyers. They will also cover the who, the what, the how, the when, and the where of interning with an organization like Civis. I would now like to hand it over to Aditya and Shrishti to begin.
Hi, thank you, Abhishek, for the very kind introduction. I'll just quickly jump into it. Abhishek mentioned, I'm just a very recent graduate from MNLU, and I'll just be talking about interning in the public policy space. So I'll just jump right in. I'd like to start with a brief introduction about my experience about interning in the policy space. So throughout law school, barring 3 or 4 internships, a lot of my internships have been focused on interning at research organizations, at nonprofits, and at parliamentary offices. So I've I made that call probably in my second to third year of law school of shifting to the policy space. And over these last 3 years, I've seen a lot of value in terms of the skills that I've picked up on and the kind of improvement that I see in my own skill set in terms of research and communication. So the way I see it is public policy. It's a very niche and very growing space currently, where you have people from a lot of different professions and a lot of different backgrounds just coming in, and it's a very good and healthy mix of everyone having a very different skill set that everyone else has a very great opportunity, just to learn about the kind of insights that I've gotten into different fields by just interning at a place where probably my legal acumen wasn't used as much, but I kind of got an insight into a lot of different sectors. So before I hand it over to Srishti about just talking about your experience at of interning in the policy space and of interning at Civis, I'd just like to take 2 minutes just introducing the and telling you more about the place that I'm currently working at. So currently, I'm working as a consultation fellow at Civis. Civis, as you can see on our LinkedIn page and on a website, we work as a platform and an organization that helps facilitate the public feedback process on ongoing public consultations. The way public consultations work currently is a lot of new ministries and departments just publish ongoing laws like the recent draft telecom bill and the draft digital personal data protection bill that's out currently. And we help aggregate these consultations and we put them up on a platform and we try to reduce the steps that it takes for a citizen to engage in the whole consultation process. So the reason why I joined Civis is because probably a year and a half prior to this role, I was working at the office of an MP, and I joined that office with the sole intention of getting more into parliamentary and legislative research, probably because I saw that as a field where one of my main key sets are being put to use. A lot of legislations, a lot of legal legislative drafting and legislative research actually picks up a lot from things that you're taught at law school. So it's a good field where you're engaged a lot with what's going on ground. You're engaged with what are the new policies and the policy reforms and the legislative reforms that are being carried out, and you're also able to use the skills that you pick up in law school. A lot of the language that law students use in terms of drafting moot court memos, or a lot of language, or the way you frame your arguments during your intra debates and even your negotiation competitions, a lot of that comes to use when you're working in this kind of field. So you also have this skill set, but then you're also faced with problems that you're not you always can't use that form of language, even though certain procedures might need them. So kind of keeping both of those things in hand, where citizens are able to understand what you're able to convey, but also making sure that the language also conveys the depth of what you're trying to like put forth. Like you might be wary of like oversimplifying a law or oversimplifying an argument. So trying to make sure that it does not lose its essence, and still making sure that it's easy to convey. That's kind of like a key conflict that I faced during most of my policy internships. So at Civis, like I'll just lead with this, and Shrishti, you can just come on in after this. So at Civis, we host 3-month internship programs, and all of these like run in a 3-month cycle back to back. And the reason why like we prefer to run a 3-month cycle as opposed to a lot of organizations that offer 1-month internships is because we operate in a very niche space in the public policy sector. We focus only on public consultations and how the whole process of increasing citizen participation in policy making, how that can be improved. So we see that the learnings that we've picked up on from past internship cycles, and the way we have insight on the way policy and consultation processes occur in India. We feel like a 3-month period is the best way for an intern to see how the space is developing. There's a lot that goes on in 3 months in terms of the policies that are put out there. So just learning that kind of like sometimes like slips by me too. So it's very nice and it's refreshing to just see that there are just so many learnings, and all of that happens like over a 3-month period. So the 3-month internship is open to law students from their third year till the end of the 3-year course. We are open to law applications from second year and the third year. We are also open to policy students and students from the liberal arts background, solely because there's just so much that goes on in the space that restricting it to just to law students kind of limits the learnings that the interns have during that period for themselves. So for a lot of tasks and for a lot of policies, like interns are clubbed together. So you have the opportunity to learn from students that don't come from the same background that you do. Probably so it's like a nice break from the law students that you would interact with in your legal internships. So that's a good way to just go through the whole internship. So Shristi, would you like to share your experience with the internship program, since this has just like finished for you?
Right. Yes. I mean, I'm to introduce myself. I'm in my third year at GLC. I still have 2 more years to go. So, as Aditya has already chosen public policy, I'm yet to decide upon it. But it has always been a strong contender for me. I think mostly because, as Aditya mentioned, it's a space which exposes you to a lot more different careers and backgrounds, a lot more. Like I don't know, like a lot more fields than just law. And I feel even if you end up choosing just to if you end up choosing that you just want to work in law, ultimately law is a field which services other fields. Like you have to be either in tech industry or energy industry or whatever you field you choose ultimately, right? So policy, I feel, also ends up helping us realize what the market is, what the legislations are, and also understanding the niche of every single area of law also in a way. So even if you end up deciding not to work in policy further on as a career option, I feel it has helped me understand the markets and the general situation in the country and the world in general. So for example, I think, just to give you an example, and also to give you an experience of my working with Civis, what they do is they club a certain type of legislations or a certain subject matter on which the suggestions are coming on, and give that to one intern. For example, in my 3 months, I worked a lot on data protection and I worked a lot on blue bonds and green bonds. And before I had worked with Civis, I just knew these terms, but I did not know it in detail, because as law students, we are doing so many things that we don't end up reading in detail unless and until it's put on our heads, or is there is some sort of accountability, right? So I think when I was working with Civis, that accountability came on, which forced me to read on these topics. And surprisingly, I ended up working on something which was again on data protection later on, and also on green bonds and blue bonds. So it all interconnected. So I think that's what made me realize how important working in public policy is for me, because ultimately you can't just be solely reading the law or just focusing on your law subjects. Because if you are end up like, if even if you want to end up in the law market, I mean, you need to understand that what industries that you're serving, right? So working in public policy helps you understand how the laws are being made, why are they being made, because policy at the end of the day is trying to solve some sort of problem, and identifying that problem and solving that problem is the main purpose of policy, is what from what I understand. So I think that is really helpful, and I think that's how policy is very important, I feel, for every law student. And when I started interning in public policy, I mean, I was like at the end of my first year, I think, and I had no clue like what's the difference between legislations and policy and all these things. And I remember I had given an interview and someone asked me, what do you think is policy? And I said, okay, the legislations which are passed, those are policy. And it was complete I was completely clueless. So I mean, I would encourage you guys, even if you don't know what policy is, I think it's a space which allows you to learn, and it allows you to be a little bit clueless in the beginning, because people are really helpful. They don't want you to know everything just as you're joining, which is the case sometimes, most of the times, when you're joining either law firms or chambers or wherever, if you're interning in law. So I think policy is a great place to start from, even if you're not sure whether this is the place where you want to end up working in throughout. And working with Civis, as I mentioned, it was great because, as Aditya mentioned, they go through a 3-month cycle, which allows us to have the time to understand the area, because even the allotment is that way how it works. So understanding one area, understanding how the legislative process, or getting suggestions from the general public, how these things work and how to interact with public, and uh, how there are so many aspects of our lives which are being controlled by the state, and how everything is being impacted by these policies. I think these are very small things which we don't realize in our day-to-day lives, which I got to learn through my experience with Civis. And that's why I think it has also helped me in my overall development, not just as a law student, as a professional in general as well, whichever field I end up going in ultimately. I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you so much, Rishti, for that. I'll just take like a minute or two to just speak about like just like general like tips for students, and like probably like busting like some common myths in the policy space. So like you mentioned, Shrishti, like the policy space like is a very accommodative space where it's, you know, it's okay to be lost like initially, and I guess like that's how it was for me. So like a general understanding that I had about the policy space, again like in the start of my second year of like law school, was I to me it seemed like a way that I saw like a group of students like move towards litigation. I saw a group of students move towards corporate law. So to me, like it was like a clear bifurcation where I could see people either taking like X route or the Y route. And having interned at a couple of chambers, and having heard experiences of people interning at corporate firms, I kind of wanted to just probably explore a little more. At that point, I hadn't banged down that public policy is the way to go. So the way like I approached it is I just like picked up like any one of the first policy opportunities that I found, and a lot of it had to do with law, a lot of it didn't. But one of the some myths that have been busted for me and in my experience are it's not like, you know, like a concrete third way out where you're not going to have things that you probably deal with in litigation, and you won't have to face the kind of hurdles that you do in corporate law. I feel like there is a lot of like convergence between like the three of them in terms of the learnings that you can implement in either of these post a public policy internship. I've personally had a lot of batchmates and interacted with a lot of like people at the internships that I've gone in institutions that work in spaces of public policy, where they've returned back to probably interning at a corporate law firm and moving on to a full-time opportunity at a law firm, only because that experience uh, that they had during that policy internship, it made them more aware about what specific law that they wanted to move towards. So like even in these particular internship cycles, we notice a lot of people, if they probably worked on policies or consultations that were more focused towards insolvency and bankruptcy, or just probably something on energy law. So given that you're so like on the ground and like you're noticing every new notification or every new law that's coming on in that space, you probably have that kind of skill set or that particular knowledge that you won't as a student when you're approaching an internship say insolvency and bankruptcy. So I feel just having that kind of like space where these multiple things kind of gives an edge to you over other candidates for when you're looking for even internships or even full-time opportunities in any space. So that's kind of been like one myth that's just busted for me. Also, something that I've figured, like just venturing out into public policy, is a lot of the skills that I picked up during law school would end up being redundant, but that like turned out to be like totally not true. A lot of things that work in terms of litigation and how you frame your argument, a lot of it is geared towards like even how you frame your oral arguments. A lot of it is geared towards how do you like make sure that the judge probably accepts your argument, and probably like how do you close the loop, that argumental loop where like it's a very thorough argument, there's no gap in it, and there's no any point where someone can just like prod around and like expose like some loophole there. That same thing like for me just speaks a lot in terms of when you're probably writing an op-ed, or when you're writing a when you're doing your own research on any particular new development in the policy space. So how do you make sure you're not letting go of one important point, or how do you make sure that there's no loophole in your own argument works there as well? So that's how that experience has been for me. Mm. In terms of general tips, I would say, like at least in terms of the 5 year course, it's a pretty long course. It's like 5 years. You have 10 semesters. You have 10 internship breaks in between. I would say it's really worthwhile to just even if you don't end up like wanting to go in the policy space, uh, it's a really good experience to probably try a hand at one internship, even if it's like a 4 week internship or like an 8 week internship, just to be sure on what you actually want to do. And I would say it's a very fun and enriching experience, like no matter what organization you end up interning at, no matter what particular side of public policy. So it's really worthwhile to just like give it a go.
I agree. I mean, I think even I have realized that how all these things are very connected. Like as you said, like policy is not detached from other parts. Like you understand how a law is being made, you understand the legislative intent, you apply it when you're framing your arguments for court. So ultimately, it ends up being connected. One myth which I have heard from a lot of my batchmates and a lot of my college seniors also, like they all believe that policy would end up being a desk job in terms of how you're just reading through things and you're just writing or just researching. But ultimately that ends up not being the case, because even in policy there are multiple facets to policy. Like you have your on ground research, you have your after the legislation or the policy has been passed, which is what we do, that we collect, which is what Civis does, that they collect the comments of the general public and try to get them implemented. So there are multiple stages to policy as well. So I have worked with places who are working on drafting the legislation. I've worked with places who are going on ground and trying to collect data. A very random instance which happened with me was that I was working on drafting a act which was about ports, and then I ended up in a firm. Ended up working on a case which was about the very similar act.
Yeah.
So you end up realizing that these things are very connected, and it really helps you, because policy is not a monotonous job, which is a lot of people feel. But I think it is, because there are multiple facets to it, and you can jump from one stage to another if you have the skills and if you have the desire to do so. So it will definitely not end up being monotonous, which is a fear, I believe, for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, so I agree on the monotonous part. Like that was kind of the fear for me as to why I
Right.
wanted to break away from litigation or like a desk job at like a firm. So the way I saw the public policy space working is you have so many different things, and there's never really going to be a point where you're just bored because you're working on one particular thing for months on end. So just having that sort of option that you're probably engaging with a lot of different actors, a lot of different organizations that come from very different places, a lot of different stakeholders that have their own experiences to share and their own inputs, and all of which are very valuable, and all of which need to be given that kind of weightage and importance while you formulate policies. So that's something that has been like a very key insight for me.
I'm so sorry, my camera just turned off. Right. So I think, yeah, how to apply for them. And I think this is especially a very big question for the people who are just starting out. And I think Aditya will be able to deal with this in depth when they are talking about Civis in general. But I think, as I said, I was very clueless when I started. Interning and in policy, especially because these are not things that a lot of people have done, so there's very less guidance available. I think for me the best resource was LinkedIn, because I've realized research organization, think tanks, and especially policy organizations make use of LinkedIn very efficiently. So you will not only get to see opportunities, but you'll also end up like learning a lot through LinkedIn, because there are posts and videos which are shared constantly, which apprise you of what policies, how can you move forward in this space, right? So I used to just go through LinkedIn constantly and try to figure out, which are the places which are open to taking people who are in their second year, third year, fourth year, whatever their qualifications are. So I think that's one thing, figuring out what suits best for the stage where you are. And the second is having a writing sample, because if you are in the public policy space, wherever you want to apply, you need to have a writing sample.
Yeah.
So something general, I think that's just handy, because sometimes you just see that there's a call for application and you have a writing sample handy, you have a CV handy, and you just apply. So it becomes that much easier, and you don't have to really put in a lot of effort, because there will be very few organizations who will ask you for a specific sample. Generally they just want to see what's your research capabilities or what's your writing capabilities, I believe. So I think that was what was handy for me, but I think Aditya will be able to answer this better.
No, definitely, like Srishti, that's actually the way even I went about it. Like, just initially, just going through LinkedIn, like seeing what organizations and what research institutes are active in the policy space. Probably just getting a hint of what organization specializes in what side of public policy. There's some that work on public health. There's some that work on social welfare. A lot work on data protection. So you have like a lot of like sectors like very neatly mapped out, and you have like a lot of like institutes and organizations that are doing like phenomenal work like in these particular sectors. Something that's also worked for me is a lot the first policy internship that I had. I kind of made it a point to keep in touch with like whoever was personally in charge of probably like managing like my workload. So just getting a sense of what their journey in the policy space has been, where they have previously interned. Uh, a lot of times, like people have interned at an ex organization, and they've recommended that this is something that you should definitely go for. They've also told me that this is something that you should avoid, and it's a worthwhile input since someone's actually gone through that process, and they've also seen the kind of work that you've done on their organization. They know they have like a brief idea of where you see your policy career like going through, what are your key interests. So they also have they have the relevant information as to guide you properly. I've had people tell me that this is not something that you should go for, given that you've already done something very similar to this, and it wouldn't be something where your skill set is getting enhanced. So it's better to focus somewhere else, and that's proved very helpful, because at that point, for a particular opportunity, I was rejected at one place, and I was very heartbroken. But a couple of like 2 months after that, while I was working somewhere else, it kind of like just came out to be that I saw people working at that organization. I realized like this is something that I've done before. This is something where I've probably worked on like a similar task before, so it wouldn't have been like an add-on. So yeah, just like another thing to add on to what Srishti has said, that just talk to the people at whatever organization that you end up like interning. It's very nice to just keep in touch also, because uh, everyone's just doing very different kinds of work in the policy space. It's nice to just keep in touch and like to just get a know-how of like what's going on. That's also something that really works. Also, there are a lot of pages on LinkedIn nowadays that have like very comprehensive databases where where you can like select what sector you want to like work on in the policy space, a lot of fellowship opportunities, and a lot of part-time opportunities as well. And something that probably like stuck out to me is, and like kind of like busted a like myth in terms of like the corporate side of it, is even in the policy space you have various different kind of roles. You can opt out for a very like like a role very similar to what you would do at a corporate law firm, in terms of you would be able to go to an organization that primarily deals in consulting. So you have uh, like you would have clients that you cater to in terms of very specific research. You could also work at a nonprofit where a lot of work is not geared with any particular intent to like move policy towards any particular area, but just more in terms of like citizen welfare and progress. And you also have research organizations that primarily work very specifically on particular topics. In order, they would do ground research, they would like do a very comprehensive literature review, and then like produce like research like reports that prove you like useful and resourceful to everyone in the policy space. So everyone's like playing like their role, and you really can't like negate any like particular role. So just like it's good to have like these kind of like roles and organizations on the lookout for.
Just to add on to that, I mean, a few months ago, I also found out that now even tier one firms have started having a policy team, and because of their regulatory and compliance needs. Now they specifically have policy teams also, and their regulatory and compliance teams also very diligently work on the consultations that are coming forward, because these obviously affect their clients as well. So that's when I started realizing how wide policy is and how much impact that it has and how many options that are available to you. So again, I mean, that was also one of the myths that policy is going to be very restrictive, and I realized that it's the completely opposite if that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, Shrishti. Like a lot of tech companies as well. Given that you have very new and very like I would say very fledgling legislations just come up in this particular space in terms of data protection,
Right.
or even if you look at the gaming sector, it's you have a lot of new regulations coming in a lot of different states in terms of what kind of gaming is legal, what kind of gaming is regulated currently, and it's such a very confusing space that almost every organization that has their like business like in this particular sector has a policy team, because you need that kind of input to have your client's best interest in mind.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think that's true. And I think in terms of like skills and opportunities that I have gained from working with Civis and in policy in general, like as I mentioned before, I was working on blue bonds and green bonds, and then I ended up working on a case and a mood. Basically, it wasn't a case, but it was something which was very related that I was working on with the firm. And because I had that prior knowledge because of Civis, it ends up looking good. Like, people realize, okay, that you are aware about a certain things. You don't end up coming as clueless that, okay, you're aware about what's happening in the markets and in the country in general. And sometimes these are things that you can't even realize while even if you're going through papers religiously, because some things are just not in news as such. So I feel like this specific industry specific things are something which you really realize in working with policy. In terms of skills that I have gotten, I think my being able to put my points comprehensively has increased tenfold, especially while working with Civis and in policy in general, because you can't have 100-page or 200-page petition or a document when you're working in policy. You have to be very comprehensive, and you have to make sure that the other person is not a law student or is not someone who is very aware about the area that you're trying to explain to them. So you have to have that capability of explaining to them what the basic idea is in your mind, right? And I think that's a skill which is useful everywhere, but especially as law students as well, because if you're even explaining in a moot competition or to a judge, this is a skill which is going to come in handy everywhere. Communication is a very basic skill which everyone needs to have. And I think working with Civis, because we had to have like, we used to have to like bring down a 100-page policy document or a 70-page document to like 100-word, or like I think it was about 500-word summary. So you're giving people an idea, okay, what are you going to read about, if you're even interested in going and looking through the whole document. So engaging people, putting forward your ideas, these are like very small skills but very crucial skills which I got to learn through Civis and then in policy in general.
Yeah, I feel like I've covered most of the points that I've had. Uh, is there anything else that
I think that pretty much sums it up. So thanks a lot,
Great.
Aditya and Shrishti. And I think that one point that I do want to reiterate, which I think was a really important point that you stressed on, which was about the importance of just trying out different things to get more perspective, right? Because that's so important. Like, even if you prima facie believe that, you know what, I don't know what this internship is going to look like, so I don't know if I should do it or if I shouldn't do it, it's still something you should at the very least try out, right? So you can at least rule it out as something that you don't want to do, or even if it's, at the very least, just a learning experience in terms of just teaching you new things, opening up new opportunities, and just letting you explore new stuff. So I think that's a very important point. And thanks once again to both of you for coming in and sharing some wonderful insights on actually interning in the public policy space, which is now a very important space in India. So thanks a lot for taking the time out for this wonderful session. And um, thanks once again.
Thank you for having us.
yeah, thank you, Abhishek, for having us.